Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of AAGAHI with your host, WARITHA ZAINAB. Today we're going to talk about perfectionism. I'm sure most of you know somebody who is a perfectionist, someone who strives for perfection and wants to do everything flawlessly. Today we are going to welcome our guest, Hana Afra, who is going to join us from Suffolk, who is currently a trainee clinical psychologist. Hana, assalamu alaikum and welcome to AAGAHI.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So how is Ramadan going?
Alhamdulillah, yeah, it's good. It's very quiet over here, so it's easy to fast, alhamdulillah.
I can imagine. For students, I can imagine how difficult it must be to fast long hours, and then you're, mashallah, doing your doctorate, so must be quite challenging.
Yeah, subhanAllah. I mean, I managed to get a couple of weeks off for Ramadan, so that's been really helping. But with deadlines and things like that, it can be really, really tricky.
Good for you. So we're going to talk about perfectionism, and I know this is something which is close to your heart, and we all know somebody either in our workplace or family environment or amongst our friends who wants to do everything to perfection, and that this often sometimes leads to other underlying issues, for example anxiety and even OCD if it's something that's not resolved for long. So first of all, tell our viewers, what is perfectionism in psychology?
Yeah, really, really good question. So I think, like you said, we've all kind of heard of it in some kind of way, shape or form. But essentially what it is, it's kind of refusing to accept anything that's less than perfect.
Right.
So, sometimes we can have that in different aspects of our life. But if you're a perfectionist, then it's across the board. You don't want to accept anything that's not perfect. And a lot of the time when we kind of think of perfectionism, we think about it in terms of ourselves, right? Like we are a perfectionist and we have high expectations of ourselves. But it can also be for other people. So you can also be a perfectionist to others, like having high expectations from other people, expecting people to be perfect, not wanting people to make mistakes. So it's not just about yourself, it's also about other people, and just not being able to kind of accept anything that is anything less than perfect, really.
But wouldn't that affect your personal relationships with your work colleagues or friends or family members if you're looking for that kind of perfection?
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely does. And it's kind of across the board as well. So like wanting to be the perfect friend, wanting to be the perfect employee, wanting to be the perfect student, kind of wanting to be perfect in everything you do. But then also, like we said, wanting other people to be perfect, which, yeah, you're right, it affects your relationships for sure. Like it definitely, if you're having those high expectations from people, and we know that people aren't perfect, we're not, we weren't created to be perfect. So you're kind of you're set up to fail, but you're also, other people are set up to fail as well, because they're not going to be able to meet those expectations, and then that's going to cause problems in those relationships. So yeah, definitely.
How does it start, like this whole idea that I must do everything perfectly, flawlessly, and there should be no mistakes or errors? I mean, for a normal, like average human being, we all want to ensure that we don't make mistakes, that nothing goes wrong. But perfectionism is like another kind of level, right? Where you cannot, like, you have set standards for yourself that not necessarily be realistic.
Yeah, definitely.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, and it's very normal to not want to make mistakes. Like you say, nobody sets out to do something and then wants to make mistakes. But I guess it's about the level of tolerance you have for those mistakes. If you're a perfectionist, it's like, under no circumstances can I make any mistakes. Like, it does not matter. So you're quite rigid in that. And in terms of where it kind of comes from, I think it's different for different people. So for some people, for example, they might have grown up in a family that has been really strict. And, they didn't tolerate people to be, to make mistakes. Children are very messy and they're very, you can't really control them. But for some people, they grow up in families where they try to be controlled. So it's not okay if if you fall down or if you do the wrong thing, or, for example, in certain cultures, for us as women, having that very high expectations, like
Oh,
you have to, take lots of responsibility, and you have to do all of, and if you do something wrong, then that's, that's not dealt with in the right way, or not maybe dealt with in a compassionate way. And so that person then grows up thinking, okay, well, if I make a mistake, that is dangerous. It's not like, if you make a mistake, you learn from it, you move on. Because you've grown up in a situation where you weren't nurtured in that way, and you weren't allowed to be given a space where you can make mistakes, and it's okay. So sometimes it's that, sometimes it's like you say, if there's an underlying condition like anxiety, an OCD, and things like that, that can bring it about. Sometimes it's trauma. If you've gone through something, maybe you've made a mistake, and then something traumatic happens, and then you link that traumatic thing to making a mistake more generally. So there's lots of, sometimes it's personality, it's just a personality trait that some people have where they're perfectionists. So I think there's lots of different places that it can kind of come from, and on different levels as well.
Now, you mentioned a really important point that in some cultures, in some family, the upbringing process is so strict where the caregivers or the parents, they do not encourage their children to learn through their mistakes, or to accept that as a child you can make a mistake, or you can go wrong, or you can be sometimes clumsy, and it's okay, that's how you learn. But strict parenting where they resort to really severe form of physical punishment, I think the child grows up learning certain things, certain behaviors, that if I make a mistake, there will be consequences. And then as an adult, you grow up with that mindset that I cannot afford to make a mistake or do anything wrong, because there will be consequences. It's like something you just believe, and isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And children are sponges. You can even maybe be trying to hide these things. It might not be as extreme as, abuse, or, that it might not even be that side of things. It might just be little things. Or if the parent themselves is a perfectionist, children pick up on these things, if they feel like they can't make a mistake. And, so we're very sensitive on my children, and our brains are still kind of developing. So it's even the little things that happen that children will pick up on and think, oh, okay, well, when they make a mistake, they're really sad every single time. So that must mean that making a mistake is bad. So, there's so many things. And like we said, culture as well comes into it quite a lot. I think it's a big factor to say.
I think self-discipline is one thing, but to punish someone, a child or a young person, or even an adult in some cases, just because they did not fulfill your expectations, it can be extreme in many cases. I'm surely there are other alternatives for self-discipline and for bringing up your children, for example, or just to ensure that people in your organization, maybe your institute, they follow all the guidelines, rules, and regulations. It doesn't always have to be like you will suffer consequences as a result.
Yeah. And there's a way to discipline that's compassionate as well. And especially it's really important for us to know that as adults, that because it comes from ourselves as well, like you said, self-discipline as well. And there's a way to do it where you let the person know that there, of course, there are going to be consequences, and of course you're not happy that mistake is made, but you can do that in a compassionate way where you have that unconditional love for that person, like we call in psychology unconditional positive regard, which means unconditionally having a positive opinion of someone, even if they slip up, even if they make mistakes. You don't discipline the person, you discipline the mistake. And so it's having that kind of compassion, but also disciplining the person at the same time. That's important.
You mentioned unconditional positive regard. If you could elaborate on that for our viewers to understand what that's all about and how it can be useful, especially for parents and teachers, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. So unconditional positive regard is it's having an unconditional, meaning there's no conditions to it. It doesn't mean if you do this and this and this, then I will. It's across the board. It's no matter what you do, no matter what happens, you have the positive opinion of somebody else. So it's having a positive opinion of somebody, even when they make a mistake, even when you're angry with somebody. You can still be angry with somebody or upset with somebody, but still have that unconditional positive regard, meaning that unconditional positive opinion of them. And it's really, really important for children. Like we said, children are sponges. It's important that, you know, they have that kind of safety of being able to make mistakes, being able to fall, but knowing that you have that unconditional love, but also the unconditional positive regard. So I think it's really easy when you're angry with somebody or when you're upset with somebody to completely write them off, you know, that whole black and white thing. Either they're a really good person or either they're a really, really terrible person. But actually having that flexibility with it is really important. Of that, I'm angry with you right now because I don't like what you did, but I still like you as a person and I still love you who you are. And that's really, really important. And not just for other people, but for ourselves as well. And I'm sure we'll kind of get into that with kind of self, you know, being self-love and things like that. But yes, that's really, really important to have that as a base for children, but also for adults as well.
Yes, yes. And I think it will be quite difficult to create a balance between to have unconditional positive regard for someone and also trying to ensure that that person doesn't take this for granted, because they know they can get away with it, and sometimes you make like unintentional accidental mistakes, and then there are people who just like think, you know what, it's okay if I do it again because this person's going to forgive me or forget about it or still be compassionate towards me.
Yeah, and I think that's really, really interesting that you said that, because I think when someone, I don't want to go too far on a tangent, but when people think of like self-compassion, for example, like being kind to yourself, we think, oh, we can't be kind to ourselves because then I'm just going to slip, you know, then I'm not going to want to do it anymore, or I'm not going to be as motivated anymore. So we use like that being critical towards ourselves to try and motivate ourselves, because we think, oh, you know, I won't do it anymore. But actually, like the research shows that the more compassionate you are to other people and to yourself, the more motivated you are, like the more likely you are to actually do well. And because you have that safe space where you can make those mistakes and you can slip up, which makes you more motivated and less likely to avoid things. So actually, it's the opposite to what we would expect it to be.
You spoke about compassion and how it can also be a motivating factor. And of course, this is something that our faith also encourages us to do. I mean, for example, in the holy month of Ramadan, we are encouraged to give charity as much as we can. And again, that comes out of compassion, that comes out of empathy for those who are less privileged than we are, or may not be in the same situation that we are. So just to kind of uplift them, to you know, share our wealth with them maybe, or our food or what have you. So practicing self-compassion, like you said, it's quite important. But when you are a perfectionist, self-compassion can be challenging, because you have set some really like you know, maybe sometimes unrealistic expectations from your own self. So where does self-compassion come in then?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, and it's very true. And I think that's why self-compassion and self-criticism go hand in hand, right? Like when you're a perfectionist, you're setting those high expectations for yourself. Like you said, you're setting yourself up to fail. You know, you can't do it. Like you can't even like perfection in itself. We're not created. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't create us to be perfect. We're created to be imperfect. So already you're setting yourself up to fail. You can't reach it. So if you know, perfectionism and self-criticism really, really go hand in hand. So if you're a perfectionist, most likely you'll also be very harsh towards yourself. So self-criticism meaning like being very harsh towards yourself, being very critical of yourself, you know, berating yourself, putting yourself down, saying like you're so useless, why did you do that, you're so silly, speaking to yourself in a way that you would never speak to other people, right? Like you would never say that to other people. If somebody makes a mistake, you would never say, what's wrong with you, you're useless, you can't do anything right. But yeah, we're so quick to do that to ourselves and to speak to ourselves in that way. And I think as a perfectionist, you set yourself these expectations, and it's almost like you tell yourself you're justified and speaking to yourself like that because you didn't meet those expectations. But actually, you're setting yourself up to fail because the expectations were too high in the first place. You're using that as it's like telling yourself it's okay to be self-critical to myself because I didn't do this. I didn't set those expectations. So self-compassion is like the opposite of that. It's, you know, talking to yourself kindly, talking to yourself how you would talk to a friend. If a friend told you, I did this thing and then I made a mistake or I wasn't able to do it, how would you talk to them? You'd say, it's okay, don't worry, we're human, we all slip up sometimes, we all fail sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's just talking to yourself in that way and giving yourself that compassion that we give to other people very, very easily, but it's a lot harder to kind of give that to ourselves, even though we need it the most from ourselves.
And I guess it's not always about making a mistake. Sometimes you try your level best, but you still do not get the outcome that you hoped for because maybe circumstances didn't allow you to, or the situation wasn't in your favor. Maybe you didn't have enough resources. It could be anything that may serve as an obstacle in your path to achieve your target or your goal. But a lot of people, they beat themselves up for that. And there will be a lot of self-blaming that, oh, I could have done better if only I was not so dumb or stupid. And like you give examples of the language that we use for our own self. You would never use that for anybody else, like you said. But why is it people are so harsh? I mean, it's good to be critical. It's good to be self-critical because that kind of serves as a motivating factor to do things.
Yeah.
But how do you recognize, Hannah, that you're being overly critical or you're being critical in a nice way that would actually help you?
Yeah. That's a really good question. And I think that's a really important distinction as well, because like you said, criticism is good because the opposite of that would be, even if you're making mistakes, doing things wrong, you're not able to take responsibility, you're not able to see when you're making mistakes, you're not able to learn from making mistakes. That's the whole reason why we've been giving this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to be able to learn from our mistakes, and we have that ability to do it. Some people don't, but we have that, within us for a reason. So I think, it is really important to do that. Like you said, it's an important skill. But and how would you know when it goes too far is when actually the thing that you wanted to do gets lost in the process. So let me try and give an example. So let's say if you're a mother, let's say, and it's really, really important to you, you want to be a really good mother. You want to be there for your children. You want to make sure you do everything right for your children. So let's say you, for example, if I give the example of my own mother's personal to me, say you kind of you bring all the responsibility on yourself. So everything that needs to be doing, I have to do it. It has to be me because I want to be a good mother. So you end up taking on all this responsibility, too much for one person to do. And in the process, you don't have that time to actually spend time with your children. You don't have that time to just unwind for your own mental health. So you end up getting stressed. You end up getting overwhelmed. You end up getting snappy and not able to deal with things. And so the very thing that you wanted to do, being a good mother, being there for your children, being, whatever it may be, gets lost because you want to do it so perfectly that you actually lose the very essence of what you want to do. And it's not just being a mother, this comes across the board. It can be anything at all. But it's when that gets lost in the process. And I think that will be that's very common. So people will really understand that if you are a perfectionist, you'll see that in yourself. You'll know that, that's happened. For me, it's happened so more times than I can even tell you, more times than I can even count. And I think it's really important at that point, when you get to that point, to stop and reflect and think, okay, why is this so important to me? Am I actually, fulfilling this thing that's important to me? Am I doing it in a way that is in line with my values or the person that I want to be?
Yeah.
That reflection is really important in trying to distinguish between the two.
Because surely you don't want to compromise on your own well-being, your own health, your own relationships with your family members or work colleagues or friends. Because in the end of the day, you have a positive intention to be the best version of yourself. But like they say, grow through what you go through. You don't have to be so critical of yourself. Like you said, you lose the main objective in the process. Now, this thing can also be linked to another issue, which is procrastination. And you know this because like most of us have experienced, you're working on a project, for example, or a task, and we want to do our best, right? We want to kind of make sure that this is done in a way that would actually meet the ultimate goal. and make everybody happy in the sense that they will be pleased with our efforts.
Yeah.
But in that process, something else happens. We procrastinate so much, whether it's
Yeah.
just thinking about it or planning or maybe
Yeah.
researching, and we get carried away. I know it happens with me. I start searching for one thing and then I open another tab for another topic, and then before I know it, 3 hours have passed and I haven't done what was supposed to be done.
Haven't done anything. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think it's very, very linked to perfectionism. Very, because I think when people hear procrastination, they think, oh, a lazy person doesn't care what they want to do. You know, they just want to waste time. But actually, they've found, again, the research shows that when people that do procrastinate, they're more likely to be perfectionists. Because, and at first that might seem like, that doesn't make sense. Like, you know, if you want it to be perfect, why would you procrastinate? But actually, it's because it's such a big task to be perfect, to want to do that perfect. Like we said, it doesn't exist, we can't do it. But because we can't do it, we think, oh, get it, I don't want to do it then. Like, if I can't reach that perfection, I can't reach that level that I'm setting up for myself, so I just won't do it. And obviously, this is all happening, you know, it's subconscious, not on a kind of conscious level. It's all happening at the back of your brain. But yeah, it's just that it's too big of a task, you know. It's too, you can't reach it. So you just think, oh, you know what, I just won't do it, it's fine. And you know, it happens in lots of different kind of areas as well. So for example, if somebody is looking for a job, you know, and they want to do a specific job, but if they're a perfectionist, then they think, okay, I have to go to this interview, and the very first interview that I had, I have to ace it. Again, it might not be a conscious thing going on. They might not be saying this to themselves, but somewhere in the back of their mind, they're thinking it. And so they're just like, they just don't go for the job. And maybe they'll make an excuse. Maybe they'll say, oh, you know what, like, it's too far, or, you know, they'll have an excuse. But really, it's that perfectionism of, I have to get it. I can't fail. I can't afford to not get this right. And so I just won't go for it anyway. I just won't do it, because then that's easier. But I'm definitely not going to fail. That is very linked to perfectionism.
It seems like perfectionism not always serves a purpose, in the sense that it wouldn't always help you in actually doing what you're meant to do, but it can also be an obstacle or a limitation in its you know, form. So it will prevent you from actually doing what you're supposed to do. Wow.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why it's so important to identify, because, you know, if you do see a perfectionist, if anybody has like perfectionists in their life, they'll know, like, they always do everything really well, and they're always like very high achieving. So on the outside, it looks like, oh, what's the problem? You know, it's great. You know, it makes you motivated. It makes you achieve. But actually, no, it doesn't. But firstly, it affects your mental health. You know, it makes you very, very anxious. It makes you always kind of on edge. If you do struggle with it in relationships, like I do, then it makes it very difficult to be yourself with people. Your relationships get affected. But also, you miss out on opportunities. You miss out on being able to actually do things, because you have that mindset of, if I don't do it perfectly, if I don't get it, that's not acceptable. I cannot accept that. And so you'll miss out on things that, you know, that interview that you didn't go to could have gone really well, and it could have been a really good job, but you don't know, because you never went for it in the first place.
Yeah.
So actually, it can be really, really, it can have a lot of really negative effects.
And also, if you're in a leadership position where, say, for example, you are the CEO of a company or a head teacher or what have you, you would have set the same kind of expectations from your employees or subjects, or, you know, people who are working under you or with you in a team.
Yeah.
And everybody's pace is different. Everybody's temperament is different. They may not be able to do it in the way that you want them to do, but they'll still get the work done. They will still do it, but maybe differently.
Yeah.
And that could create conflict within that environment.
Yeah.
So
yeah, definitely. And I think, and that's a big part of leadership, is being flexible, like, you know, being able to be flexible, working with people where they're at. But if you do have that kind of perfection, and not every perfectionist would be like that, but if you do, you know, have that, then, you know, it's very difficult. I'm not going to say it's impossible to be a good leader, but it's very, very difficult, because you don't have that flexibility. You can't nurture someone. You can't allow someone to be themselves. And it's very similar to the parenting example that we were using as well, of not being able to let people make mistakes, and children make mistakes, and not being able to let children fall. it's very similar as a leader, for your employee, not being able to let them make mistakes, not being able to let them do it in their way, not being able to give them that flexibility. It's really, really important. So it not just affects the person, it affects the people around the person, and not just the leader, even in a relationship, like, in a marriage, for example, or in a friendship. If you're not willing to let other people make mistakes and let other people fall sometimes and get back up, and again, it's not conscious, it's not, somebody saying you can't make a mistake at all costs, it's subconsciously. If you're not able to do that, then your relationships will suffer across the board, not just, parental as a leader, but also like friendships and marital relationships as well.
So you mentioned earlier on that sometimes people who are extremely perfectionist, where they seek extreme perfectionism, they may also suffer from anxiety. And for example, if people don't get the expected results, what are their chances of falling into depression?
So I'd say both depression and anxiety are really, really linked to perfectionism. Because anxiety, in the sense that, you feel anxious because you can't reach up to these expectations that you've set for yourself. But depression, in the sense that when you don't live up to those expectations, when you do, and then because you will, because you, like we said, you're setting yourself up to fail. And when you do fail, you're much, much more likely to fall into that depression. Like we said, that self-critical thoughts that you have about, I'm useless, I'm this, I'm that. Those things will spiral. Eventually you will, the more you talk to yourself negatively, the more likely you are to then, for that to then develop into a depression. And to think, I don't even want to leave the house because I don't want to, I'm not worth it, or because I'm just going to fail anyway, or because I'm just going to, I'm not going to be able to deal with it. And all this is because of those high expectations that you set up in the first place. You set yourself up to fail, but then when you fail, you blame it on yourself. You say, like, it's me, it's my fault. And like you said, there's loads of other things that are going on around that could be the reason why something didn't work out. But if you're a perfectionist, you're much more likely to internalize, meaning like you're much more likely to put it inside you and say, it's me, it's my fault, I'm to blame. And the more you do that, the more that will just increase and spiral, and that can easily spiral into a depression, because there's only so much that you can take. And so that is a very, very big risk of being, perfectionistic, and of talking to yourself in a specific way as well. Of being self-critical. That's why being compassionate with yourself is really, really important. Even if you don't feel it, the more you do it, the more you can kind of rewrite that, that kind of script that you say to yourself all the time. And we think it's no big deal, we talk to ourselves in ways that, like we said, we wouldn't talk to other people, and we think it's okay, like it's not a big deal. But it's not okay, and it really can spiral into depression very easily before you know it, really. So it's really important to be kind to yourself and be aware of how you're speaking to yourself.
Is perfectionism something that is merely a personality trait, or is it something that is a learned behavior, or something that you inherit from your, say, for example, parents or grandparents? Or a bit of both?
Yeah, I think like lots of things, isn't it? It's a bit of a mixture of both, really. I think in terms of the research, they're not 100% clear, but it's a mixture of everything. It's that learned behavior as a child, like we spoke about, children being sponges, children really picking up on things. But also it can be as an adult, you can kind of go your whole life of not having it, and then something big happens, and then that kind of leads to a perfectionistic style of thinking. Especially, let's say, if you develop anxiety or depression, like you said, that can kind of lead into a perfectionistic style of thinking as well. Or if you go through a trauma, or if something like that happens, so it can kind of be a mixture of both, of your parents and how you were raised, but also of kind of like environmental factors and things that happen to you across your life.
Could it also be as a result of previous toxic relationships, or the fact that you have come from a really dysfunctional household where unrealistic expectations were set by the caregivers or a spouse, or a teacher even, and they have learned that kind of behavior, and now when they're forming new relationships, they're forming these new relationships with the mindset that if I don't act in a certain way, if I don't respond in a certain way, or if I don't do things perfectly, then it will impact my relationship. And the other person is not going to accept me, not going to like me, not going to appreciate or approve me or love me even.
Yeah, definitely.
How can you reprogram your mind for
Mm,
future if your past experiences were such?
yeah. And I think that's a big one. If you've been in an abusive relationship, for example, where somebody's been emotionally abusive, always telling you that, that you're worthless or you're useless, or every time you make a mistake, they're really harsh about it, then that can, and you can kind of go your whole life of not having that perfectionistic tendency, of not being that kind of person, but then you go through a situation like that, it's so traumatic. And again, it reprograms the way that you think about yourself as well, especially if you've been in that relationship for a long time, then definitely that can. And I think, it's really, really difficult when there's been somebody else, that has, and that voice has kind of been internalized again, so like put inside of you as your own, and you start to talk to yourself like that can be really difficult. But I think in terms of how to reprogram your brain, I would say is that self-compassion. So that saying, whenever you say something, being aware of those thoughts is the first step. Being aware how are you talking to yourself? What kind of words are you using to describe yourself? Where is it coming from? If it was from an abusive relationship, or was it because that's the way that, I don't know, your parents spoke to you, or that's the way that, you're in an abusive friendship, let's say, like a very toxic friendship, and that's what is that voice? Like, where is it coming from? First, identifying that. What's it saying to you? Being aware of what is it actually saying to you. And then using an alternative self-compassion. So ask yourself, if a friend said this to me, said, I'm whatever these thoughts are, what would I say? How would I respond to that friend? How would I be compassionate towards that friend? And doing that to yourself and speaking in that same way, using that same tone of voice that you would use for your friend, the same words that you would use for that friend that you really care about, and speaking that to yourself. And at first it will be really difficult. It won't feel natural. You won't believe it. But in time, it reprograms. They found that it actually reprograms the neural pathways, so meaning the pathways in your brain. It actually reprograms it the more self-compassionate you are to yourself. So it's something that over time, if you do it consistently, then it will have that impact. But it's very difficult, very, very, especially if you've been in a traumatic, abusive relationship where this person has really knocked your confidence completely, you're completely on the floor. It can be really, really difficult. So I think getting other people as well and telling them what you're doing and getting them on board and, telling them what are your struggles, where does it come from, being really vulnerable with, somebody that you trust and letting them help, go alongside you in that journey and helping you to build that self-compassion as well, if you do find it difficult to do it by yourself.
We know that there are many faces of perfectionism. What are some of them so that people can kind of recognize? Because as a person, you wouldn't know if you are or you're not. But somebody else may point out that, oh, you're a perfectionist, or you're too difficult as a person to deal with. But how can you assure yourself whether you are or you're not?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Are there any signs we should look out for, or any specific behavior?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think with perfectionism, it has to be across the board. So everybody has this one thing where they want to be perfect in it, and it's really important to them, and so they'll really try hard, and that's okay. That's not necessarily perfectionism. But if you feel like in every single aspect of your life, you can't deal with making mistakes. So every time you make a mistake, so think about it as well. Reflect on your life. Reflect on times when you've been feeling really anxious or really depressed. What's been happening? Has it always been because you've made a mistake, or has it always been because you've done something that hasn't reached an expectation? So reflecting on it is really important, because I guess you can go through your life not knowing that this is what it is and not kind of connecting the dots in that way. But if in every single different aspect of your life, so whether it's work or school, which again is relatively normal, you know, a lot of people have that. But if it's also in relationships, you know, if it's also in friendships, it's also in, you know, family relationships, where that's supposed to be the time that you relax and the time that you let loose from all these stresses of the world. If you still feel like that in those situations, then that's a big indicator that you're a perfectionist, because that's not, you know, we don't like to use the word normal, but that's not how other, you know, people who aren't perfectionists would be in a relationship, like in a friendship. Or that's a really, really big indicator. And I think what's really important, so for me, in my kind of perfectionism journey that's still ongoing, it's what's been really, really beneficial for me is just looking at, okay, what are the things that trigger me? Like, what are the things that I really want to be perfect in? What are the things that I, you know, what are the things that really affect me, you know, and how does my perfectionism play out? What kind of things do I say to myself? Like I said, what kind of beliefs do I have and where have those come from? And you can do that through, you know, by yourself, through kind of journaling and writing things down and reflecting. You can also do it through therapy. So like having a therapist who also, you know, talks you through these things, and it can kind of help you to connect those dots and make those connections. But I think having that awareness of yourself is a huge, huge, big step, and it's so beneficial, not just for perfectionism, but for just life in general. But if you're trying to identify, is this me, am I a perfectionist, then self-awareness is really important for that.
Talking about the use of language with our own self, when it comes to other people, sometimes they would use certain terminologies without having any understanding of it. For example, I'm sure you've heard this, somebody saying, oh, you're so OCD about this. Mm-hmm. It's not that big a deal. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think people realize what OCD really is. I mean, it's a disorder. It's not something to be, you know, to laugh about or joke about. Mm-hmm. It's a serious condition which stems from anxiety. Mm-hmm. And often people who are perfectionists, they struggle with it, with anxiety. And if it's left untreated or unresolved, then it can lead up to a mild form of OCD. So how can you prevent it from happening? And this is for people who are perfectionists, and they know they are, but they are struggling, and they don't want to end up being, you know, OCD. So how can they prevent it from happening?
So I think it kind of depends on how serious it has got to by that point. So if it's serious in the sense that it's been going on for a long time, you've been trying to kind of deal with it by yourself and it's been difficult, then I think therapy is really important. You know, important to kind of help you to make those links and help you to just start to challenge these beliefs, because I think if it's very deep rooted and you can't even begin to challenge it, you know, you don't even feel like it's wrong, or you don't even feel like, you know, you just feel like this is 100% true and that's that, then therapy can be really important to try and like start to challenge those beliefs and start to do it with somebody by your side. If it's a less mild, it's kind of starting out, you feel like it's, you know, something that you can kind of get a handle on, then even doing that yourself, so things like we said, writing about, you know, the thoughts that you have, the beliefs that you have. Let's say, for example, you have the belief, I must do, like if you're a student, let's say, I must get 100% in all my assignments. Then starting to challenge that, starting to, like, there's little things that you can do, for example, like, it sounds silly, but little things like if you're writing an email, let's say, you're at work and you write lots of emails, not proofreading that email and just sending it off. Or not checking, if you're known to kind of check things a couple of times, then giving yourself a limit, only checking it once and then that's it, it's done. And forcing yourself to do that, because like you say, it can spiral and it can increase into something like OCD if it's happening a lot, and if it's not. So it's a lot easier to get a handle on it when it's just mild, and when it's something that you feel, oh, it's not a big deal, just check it a couple of times, it's fine. But that can then increase and spiral. So kind of tackling it at that point, You feel like, no, I have to do it. I have to check this, or I have to, prove my email. If I'm doing an assignment, I have to stay up all night and do it. Just starting to challenge those and seeing to yourself, actually nothing bad happens. And again, I've done this myself, with assignments or with emails and things like that, where I'm just like, I'm just going to do it and see. And it's scary, and it's like a very anxiety inducing, but actually at the end you see, oh, it's fine, nothing bad happened. I didn't fail that assignment, or I didn't. And it's only when you start to do that and you start to challenge these beliefs, and by doing, something different to what you normally do, it's only then that you can start to challenge that belief and start to make sure that it doesn't then spiral into something more. But if it is really intense, or even if it's not, even if it's mild, therapy is a really, really good thing to do for everybody. I know we have this stigma, especially in our Muslim communities, on therapy, or you have to be crazy to have therapy. Yes. Or it's not for me. But actually, no, therapy is really, really important for everybody, for anybody. You don't have to be on a really, really kind of crisis point to have therapy.
It should not be the last resort. Like, for most people, we know that it will be the last thing they'll resort to, not the first option.
Yeah, and it's really sad, because actually therapy is not as effective when you do reach crisis point. It's actually better as a preventing you from getting to that crisis point, compared to when you're at crisis point. It's very sad that we wait until we're at that crisis point before we then have therapy. It's less likely to work. It's not as good of an experience. Mm-hmm. When actually it's really important to have it, when you kind of see yourself starting to become anxious, or you feel like things are changing a bit, you feel like it's getting a little bit worse, that's the point where it's really good to do therapy. And you can do it at the same time. There's no one saying that you have to do therapy and stop everything else. Do everything else that you do, all your coping mechanisms, everything that we have in Islam, the ibadah, the prayer, everything, do everything. And then at the same time go for therapy. It's not an either or situation, and it's not, you can do it together, and it can complement each other.
It's time we normalize going for therapy and counseling. Not stigmatize it that, it's only for people who have lost it completely. That is not the case. It's the same as if, God forbid, somebody's got a little tumor, and you're not going to wait till it reaches stage 4 cancer. Surely you're going to go straight to the doctor, get it treated, get it sorted, go for radiotherapy or chemotherapy, what have you. Mm-hmm. Similarly, it's for your mental. When it comes to your mental health, you treat it the same way as you treat your body. That if there are any pain, the pain is not normal, right? Pain is an indication that there is something going wrong, or it's upset within your body. Same with your mind. If you're feeling psychologically overwhelmed, stressed, in pain, you're having constant crying spells, and you don't understand what's going on, it's completely normal to seek professional help. There's no reason to feel ashamed or feel that you have failed as a Muslim or you've failed as a believer. That is not the case.
No. And we know, if with the example that you gave with the stage 4 cancer, what happens if you wait until it's stage 4?
Yes.
It's too late. It's too late at that point. So there's nothing that the doctors can do. And so you're right. If we treat it the same as mental health, because of course it's the same. If you reach it in the crisis point, it's too late. You've reached crisis point. There's not a lot that they can do. Whereas if you do it before, when you start to feel different, you start to feel a change in the same way you would go to your GP. Once you start to feel a change in your body, or you feel something not right, or you have some kind of pain in your body, you go straight to your GP. You won't wait until a year later. You would never do that. So 100%, I agree. I think that's very true.
You were earlier on talking about your own experiences, Hannah, with perfectionism, and you're currently working on it too. And I know it must be really difficult, especially when you're a full-time student and you're working on your dissertation or research papers, what have you. You can't afford to make a mistake, or let alone set a target, or maybe you've been given a target by your mentors or your teachers, and you know that you have to kind of fulfill the criteria. How do you stay sane by ensuring that but you don't go overboard? You don't make compromises on your own emotional well-being while meeting that criteria. How do you create that balance?
It's a very good question. I ask myself that a lot. How do you stay sane? No, I think what's really important is, again, I've been working on this for a long time. So it takes a long, long time to get to a certain stage. So I think when it comes to like assignments and things like that, knowing, like I said, your personal triggers, for me, assignments is like huge. Like assignments and exams is a huge trigger. So knowing that, I know, okay, I'm going to start early. And when I start early, like I'll just do it little bit by little bit, because otherwise I'll be able to spend so much time on it, just waste so much time on just this one assignment. So I know I've learned what works for me, and like I know that, okay, starting early, doing like an hour every day for a couple of weeks is better for me than doing it like, a week before and doing it all day every day. So knowing myself enough to know that works from, over the years, but also, like I said, giving myself limits, because I could do that forever. I could happily do that forever. 1 hour every day for the rest of my life, great. I'll get it perfect, but that's not realistic, and that's not what I'm going to do. And I don't let myself do that. So I make sure that I have a limit. So by this point, I will stop. It doesn't matter if it's perfect. It doesn't matter if there's some things that I'm not happy with, because I know there's always going to be. I know I'm not like the average kind of non-perfectionist person where they're going to get to a point where they're like, oh, this is great, cool. No, like that's not going to happen for me. So I have to force myself to stop once I'm done, rather than keep editing it and re-editing it, going over it again and again and again. So knowing myself enough to do that, but also giving myself those limits. And like I said, taking that time to just generally, like outside of uni, I think taking that time to understand, like what are these perfectionist beliefs? Where did they come from? How do they affect me? Okay, is this true or is this not true? That's a big thing. If you have a thought and you think, I have to do this, you just take it. Like, yeah, I have to do it. That's it. But questioning that, challenging that, do I have to do it? Actually, is it okay if I fail? Is it going to be the end of the world? What's going to be wrong? What's wrong if I fail? What's actually going to happen? And really challenging that, like really, really challenging that thought has really helped me as well. And I think in terms of relationships in general, so like friendships and things like that, what really helps me is there's this quote that says, focus on connection and not perfection.
Wow.
And so when you're a perfectionist, like you want to be the perfect friend and the perfect person because you care, right? Like it's part of your values, it's important to you. So it's really important to keep that in mind and like actually focus on that part as opposed to the perfection part. So think like, okay, I want to be a good person. Like this is why I want to be a good. So let me instead focus on that connection with that person instead of focusing on, I have to get this perfect. So just focusing on that part that really matters to me, that kind of my values, the thing that's important to me is really good. And also that whole feel the fear, do it anyway. So even though you're scared, even though you feel anxious, even though you feel like I have to do this perfect, do it anyway. Do it however, do it however you want to do it, and just force yourself to walk away. Like just force yourself to that's it, I've done it, walk away. And it's so hard to do it at first, but the more you do it, the more you kind of get used to it and it gets easier over time.
Yeah.
So that's been really useful for me.
Because the kind of society that we live in, especially in the West, they have set such unrealistic goals and expectations for something as simple as you're going out on the buses. There are adverts on billboards like perfectly flawless skin.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Can it's like our society has made this belief that imperfections of any sort are unacceptable.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, it has to be flawless, it has to be perfect, and they have set standards, whether they're beauty standards or standards for what have you. And even if an average person who is not a perfectionist may fall into that vicious cycle of being a perfectionist, because otherwise they're going to feel out of place. It will affect their self-esteem. They may feel less confident, have low self-esteem, feel anxious in certain situations because they're constantly comparing themselves with somebody else who's in a totally different situation or has come from a totally different environment or background. No two people can be the same. So why compare yourself with others?
I'm actually really glad that you brought that up, because that's a really important point. When talking about where does this come from, it's not just it's a society as well. Like, it's not just the person, it's not just having a particular upbringing or having a traumatic experience. Actually, like you say, the society, you know, we're brought up to believe that you can't be anything less than perfect. You can't look anything less than perfect. You can't behave anything less than perfect. And that affects you, you know, those kind of advertising things that you see all the time, and it does affect you. You might think it doesn't, but it does. It really does. And also, I think within our community as well, within our Muslim communities, that's a really big thing too, you know, with this kind of idea of being the perfect Muslim. And, you know, everybody wanting to everybody bringing forth that perfect version of themselves. And with social media at the moment, it's a lot easier to kind of airbrush that and bring that perfect version of yourself, whether that's in the looks wise, or whether that's in like, oh my gosh, I have this perfect life, or I have this perfect job.
Couple. That's
perfect couple, trend.
That's another trend, like the perfect power couple. Like, come on.
Relationship goals, and the perfect Muslim, even, you know, we have it in our communities on, you know, this, and we see people that are living these lives that appear to be perfect, and we think, and again, children growing up with social media, again, they're very, you know, they're very easily influenced. And so you grow up to think everybody else can do it. You know, everybody else has this perfect life and is this perfect Muslim and has this perfect relationship. Why can't I do it? There must be something wrong with me, you know. And then if you're a perfectionist, that's times 100. You know, it's even worse. So yeah, definitely, I think society has a
what are the chances of people just giving up completely? I mean, we know sisters, a lot of Reward sisters who came to the path of Islam, for example, and then people were so judgmental and so critical that in the end they left everything, they took their hijabs off, and they've gone back to where they started, because that's how they were made to feel, that you're not perfect, you're not good enough. So that's another thing.
And it's really sad. It's really sad, because that's not the way that the religion is. You know, that's not the way that Islam was meant to be. And you know, somebody who's coming into the religion, and that's the welcome that they're getting, which is so opposite to what Islam actually is and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to be. Like, that's just, to me, that's very sad. And you almost can't blame the person, you know, if you're coming into something and getting it from all angles, just criticism.
Yes,
it's subhanallah. It's really sad.
We only have 4 minutes left, so any final message you would like to share with our lovely brothers and sisters who are watching us right now?
So I would say, if you're a perfectionist, then start somewhere. You know, I told Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He loves the acts that are consistent, even if they're small. So it's okay, like, it's okay to do something wrong or to make a mistake, but just start somewhere with it. So be aware of what your beliefs are. How do you feel? Like, how does your perfectionism show up? And then start to tackle it small steps, you know, like something as simple as, like I said, the email, you know, or something, whatever you struggle with, whatever area you struggle with, start somewhere, start to tackle it. Because the more you leave it, like we said, it will just increase. And also, the really big thing is self-compassion. So be kind to yourself. Like, even if you fail, even if you fall, even if you make a mistake, even if other people around you are saying things to you, like, you know, aren't being very compassionate, starting with that compassion within, and also being aware of your company as well. But being kind to yourself is really important if you are a perfectionist, and knowing that it's okay to be imperfect. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to be imperfect. That's okay. Realize what it is that's important to you and focus on that rather than the perfection.
Jazakallah khairan, Hannah. That was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And in this holy month of Ramadan, I pray that we all seek that level of expectation that our Creator has from us, and also remember that He's Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. So instead of us judging Allah that He's going to punish us or there will be severe consequences, let's just first acknowledge that He's the most merciful. and the doors of repentance are open in this holy month of Ramadan. Let's be kind and compassionate to ourselves so that we can be kind and compassionate to others. Inshallah, I'll see you all next Saturday with another guest and another topic around your mental health and psychological well-being. Till then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.